Good evening, everyone. Welcome, welcome. So tonight we are here to talk about economic justice and moving toward a guaranteed income. I will be joined by two special guests, St. Paul Mayor Melvin Carter and Mayor Michael Tubbs of Stockton, California. Mayor Carter and Mayor Tubbs are both part of the Mayors for Guaranteed Income Coalition. What is a guaranteed income? Just like Social Security, it provides a regular check to every American so they can buy the things they need, like housing, food, and other essentials. In recent years, guaranteed income has gained traction as a policy antidote to poverty and rising wealth and income inequality. But the idea isn't new. Concept of a guaranteed income has deep roots in the civil rights movement with Martin Luther King and others. I've sponsored a bill to guarantee income when the pandemic hit. We've also co-sponsored the automatic boost to communities, ABC Act, with Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib and Pramila Jayapal. The legislation would immediately provide $2,000 payment using Boost debit cards to every person in America as a critical relief during COVID-19 crisis, followed by 1,000 reoccurring monthly payments for 1 year after the end of the crisis to help our community and families recover. In addition, I've sponsored a federal grant program to support localities pursuing basic income pilot, like the ones we will hear about tonight, in order to establish a national commission to study and centralize data collection and analysis of guaranteed income for institutionalized learning. And with that, I would like to introduce our first guest, St. Paul Mayor Carter. Welcome, Mayor.
Thank you much. Thanks for having me on.
Mayor Melvin Carter is fourth generation St. Paul resident. Mayor Carter leads with an unapologetic equity agenda. He is also one of my really good friends, and I am just delighted to have him join us. The initiatives in his equality agenda are just, I think, exceptional. And maybe, Mayor, we can start with some of those initiatives, if you can just highlight that for us.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I appreciate the work that you do, and this is absolutely something that we're committed to as a city. The first is, I think, the frame around equity. This is something that Mayor Tubbs, who's also a close friend of mine, so I'm excited to be on this call with both of you guys. And the frame for us is equity, right? And we have to lead with this unapologetic equity agenda. One of the things that I find, Congressmember, is that oftentimes we talk about equity, and even some of us who are most passionate about equity sometimes have difficulty defining what we mean by equity. Sometimes we know we want the photographs to look diverse and we want people to feel good, but in terms of really putting our finger on what we're working towards, we're not 100% sure. I went to business school, so the working definition I use comes from corporate America. Equity is a money word. It's a money that's about ownership. And along with ownership comes both participation in decision-making processes, because every decision that's ever made is made to benefit the decision maker, but then also participation in an economy. And so our perspective is that, if even as the first Black mayor of St. Paul, Minnesota, if I just disappear into my office and make decisions by myself, that would be more of the same and not a route to a fundamentally new future for our city. We have to engage people in the process. And so when I hire my cabinet members, or when I set my budget, when we rewrote our police department's use of force policies, we did all of those things through robust public engagement kind of processes. But the second piece is so important. We have to be able to participate in an economy. Right now, literally this week, we see record stock market returns for the asset holding class. We know that under the Trump economy, billionaire wealth has increased by $1 trillion, while meanwhile, right here in St. Paul, We've had over 80,000 applications for unemployment insurance since March 15th. We've literally seen our population of individuals experiencing unsheltered homelessness increase more than 10 times this time last year. And we have families who've never had to think about this stuff before, worried about how they're going to feed their children and pay the rent, and what in the world is going to happen when mortgage foreclosure and eviction moratoriums kind of expire. And so we started. So our perspective ultimately is it's not good enough to do like economic development with the notion of we're going to find some business somewhere else and pay them money to bring those jobs here to St. Paul. We have to figure out how to kind of realize the potential that already exists in our community. We've eliminated late fines in our public libraries, which is a policy that literally immediately in the first quarter of that policy resulted in double-digit increases in library use in our lowest income neighborhoods. We have created pilots to do everything from helping low-income families with school-age children pay the rent, to engaging, homeless families or homeless individuals who are frequent users of emergency services in proactive kind of housing and kind of supportive resources type of things. Right here in 2020, in St. Paul in 2020 alone, we've launched College Bound St. Paul, which starts every child born in our city with $50 in a college savings account. We've launched Families First, which provides $300 a month for low-income families to help them pay the rent. We suspended water shutoffs so every family can afford to wash their hands in an emergency. We created the St. Paul Bridge Fund, which provided a $1,000 one-time $1,000 cash benefit to a set of families, low-income families in our city. And we recently launched our People's Prosperity Guaranteed Income pilot project, which identifies 150 very low-income families with young children who've had their income impacted by the COVID crisis to receive a $500 monthly benefit, unconditional monthly benefit for a period of 18 months. So we're staying busy.
You are very busy. I was just absorbing all of that, and I know I had all that list, but I think it sounded better when you did it. I think oftentimes we hear pull yourself by your bootstraps. And I know our former senator, Franken, used to say, you can't pull yourself up in your bootstraps if bootstraps are not provided
right.
to you.
That's
and so
right.
it sounds like these programs that you have designed and implemented and have thought of are essentially creating that bootstrap for families who don't have any.
That's exactly the goal. It's easy when you've been born with a silver spoon in your mouth. It's easy when you've been born with every privilege. It's easy when you got $1 million inherited from your father to say everybody just do this on your own and pretend you did it on your own. The truth is nobody's done any of this stuff on their own. Some of us are born with inherent privileges and advantages, and some of us are not. We still live in a country, Congresswoman, in which we can predict a child's expected life outcomes more accurately based on her race and her zip code than we can based on her GPA. And it's incumbent on us all to do something about that. I'll tell you, unfortunately, 2020 is a real case study in all of these things. In St. Paul, we don't use the word recovery. As people say, when we recover from all this, the reason I don't like to use the word recovery is because recovery makes it sound like we think we're trying to get back to where we were 6 months ago or 6 decades ago in some of our cases, when our goal has to be to move forward. If we haven't learned anything else, look, my grandfather would always say, if experience don't teach you, then nothing will. And if we haven't learned anything in 2020, I pray that we as a country have learned that as long as one family can't afford a stable home to shelter in place, as long as one worker can't take a week off to care for a sick child, as long as one community member can't go to the doctor when they get sick, that we're all less safe as a result of that. So our hope is that we fundamentally rethink our economic structure, that we fundamentally rethink the way our democracy works. I was on the phone with Mayor Tubbs and one of our mentors named Mayor Steve Benjamin in Columbia, South Carolina. He said something that was really profound. He said, 2020 has been like 1919, 1932, and 1968, all in a span of a few months. And that was mind blowing, and it's accurate, right? Because we've gone through all these incredible crises all at the same time. But the other piece of that is that if you think about all of those chapters of life, 1918, you had women's suffrage that came right after that. 1932 happened right before the New Deal, right? Was our response to that. 1968, that's the era of civil rights and the Civil Rights Acts. And so the truth is, I think what we should be thinking about right now, every precedent says that in a set of crises like this, we have to not think about how we tinker around the edges. Every time in this century at least, every time we have faced a set of crisis this deep and this profound, this compound, America has responded by fundamental shifts in the way we expand our definition of our democracy, in the way we define who we say is the we is and we the people, and in the way our economy works. There's no precedent for anything else but a fundamental shift in the way this all works. That's the only way we're going to push beyond all this moment.
So what I also hear is that, as you think about creating policy for your city, you think about, what are the policies that are going to undo harm? What are the policies that are going to stabilize, right? And then what are the policies that are going to allow us to leap into the future? And one of those policies where you are leaping into the future is this pilot program that you have. And I know that you've told us the criteria of how the program will be implemented. I'm wondering how you are choosing the particular families that are going to participate, and who gets to decide who those families are.
All right, it's a great question. So I mentioned our College Bound St. Paul program. That's a program that excites me to no end. When we said we're going to do that, of course, anything we do, makes people so angry. It made people angry when we eliminated late fees, but we know that late fines don't do what we think they did. We thought forever that they make people bring books back. The truth is, they make people stay away from the library, right? And all of these things, people, somebody gets mad, and that's fine. Somebody's going to have to, I suppose. So like even our College Bound St. Paul program, like that's based on research that shows that children from low and moderate income families who graduate from high school with literally like a little bit of dollar, like $50, $100 set aside for college, are 3 times more likely to go to college. And when they do, they're 4 times more likely to graduate.
Right.
Which was like, to me, a mind-blowing thing to know. And
That
it's
was
too much.
your Oprah aha moment.
It's too much for us to know and not do something about, right? I was on this comedy show last summer, and the comedian goes, "Oh, $50 for college, huh? That might not be enough." Boom, ching, right? And it's the punchline. But here's the thing: $50, won't pay for a credit or maybe a book for some folks. But we have some children in our community for whom high school graduation looks like a finish line. And what $50 can do is it can just turn on the sort of light beyond that line and get us to start early, casting our imagination beyond that point and showing our children like we believe in you enough to invest in you. And that's why it has such a profound impact. So one of the things that we're excited to do, and we're excited to build on the kind of national research that Mayor Tubbs has led and Stockton has led, and we're doing along with this kind of Mayors for Guaranteed Income, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit later, is connecting our guaranteed income pilot with our College Bound St. Paul program. And so all of those families will be families who have had a baby in 2020, families whose income has been impacted by the COVID crisis. And so we've identified and families who have some demonstrable impact based on kind of the pandemic economy. And so we've identified that cohort of families, and the 150 families that will participate or have been chosen at random. We've already got over 100 families who are enrolled in that. It's important that we are having conversations with them about sort of the benefits cliffs, because we don't want to add somebody, $500 in a way that makes them lose $600 in federal benefits. By the way, that's the real point of that conversation is how ridiculous the federal eligibility criteria is, so we're doing that work through our city's Office of Financial Empowerment. We're doing it in partnership with a national research team, the same team that evaluated the work in Stockton. And we're excited to find out, we're excited to both help a set of families that need help right now more than ever, while contributing to the national research that we'll bring to your office in Washington, D.C., as you and I and all of us work together to say this kind of policy should really be enacted on the federal level.
Yeah. Why did you choose now? Why is this especially important during the pandemic?
All right, because families need it. Because families need it. Like, because I mean, we're in a space right now where it's almost like there is no tomorrow, right? Like tomorrow is just not promised. I mean, the extent to which our families are just in crisis. Our families, and literally every family, is in crisis right now, and people just need the help in ways that, frankly, we're not used to. And I'll tell you, one of the things that surprises me about all this is people say, "Why are you doing it this way, Mayor? Why unconditional cat? Why not just give them money for like groceries or money for childcare, some specific?" And that's how we're used to giving money, right? Like we can have this like PPP program at the federal level that just gives cash out to big businesses, right, with very little oversight. Or very little compliance requirements. By the way, many of our small businesses here in St. Paul were unable to access those resources because so much of it went to big corporations. But here we are 60 years into a war on poverty, and the notion of investing directly in low income families still feels like strange and radical to us. It's insane. Now's the moment we have to break that. And like I said, if we don't in this moment, if we don't do it right now, I believe there will be really dire consequences for the United States for at least the next generation.
Oh, that's profound. I mean, I know you and I have, being a first in common.
Yep.
Um, but another thing that we have
I'm
in
not as good an Among Us player as you are, but right,
we'll have to do it
right.
one of these days. But one of the other things that we have in common that often doesn't get talked about is that we both have a lot of kids.
Yes.
And I know when the pandemic hit, one of the first things that I noticed was that I was spending enormous amounts of money in
Hmm.
feeding,
Hmm.
just drastically
That's right. That's
different
right.
than right like pre-pandemic.
That's right.
And I think oftentimes we forget just how not only the loss of job, not only you know the the fact that there are family members who are sick, or maybe we're losing a family member, is impacting us during this pandemic. But we're also having to spend more on things like food and electricity
That's
and
right.
water, and all of the other things that we did not spend so much money on before the pandemic. And economically, when we think about what support looks like, it is important, right, that we have a 360 lens, that really addresses the kind of economic challenges that people are having, because it's not something that a small band-aid can help with.
That's right. There's no band-aids for this. Like this is like, I mean, and we're not even, as we talk about kind of what happens after and as we come out of a pandemic and all this type of things, I'll tell you, we have such big questions to grapple with as a country right now. And we haven't even really gotten to the $1 million question, which is too big, too difficult, too just mind-blowing to even discuss, which is like what happens when these eviction and foreclosure moratoriums expire. And we know that we have millions of Americans who are behind right now. What happens after that point? We need serious national, federal level resources. We're going to break all of our piggy banks here in City Hall, working to support people, working to support families, those families who are distance learning. I sat at this table just surrounded by, I was like a scene on Little House on the Prairie, just surrounded by like kids distance learning, at this same table, of all ages. Because you're right, we've got a lot of young folks around here, and
We take turns talking in our house sometimes.
well, look, we have to like limit our internet access, right? I got two phones and an iPad and a laptop, and the one, if you're not like if this device isn't in an actual meeting right now, it just can't be on the internet, or else like we're gonna just clog up all the lanes for each
Yeah,
other.
tap me in. You got to go take a break.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so like just how do we help our families through this moment? Like how do we just keep stay on our feet kind of in this moment?
Yeah.
And I mentioned the number of people It is freezing right now in Minnesota. And in Minnesota, that's not a metaphor, right? And I'm looking, it is, let's see, it's slow, my phone. It is 28 degrees in
Right,
St. Paul right now.
right.
And we have 300 families living in tents.
Yeah. I mean, it's just not in the cold, like it's been snowing for us.
That's right. That's right. And we have 300 people who are living in tents in our community right now. This time last year, Congresswoman, we were tracking 29 people living in tents in our city. Right now, we have over 300 people. And the thing you have to know is, and this is cities across America, is that if you live in the suburbs or if you live in the exurbs and you live in some community that doesn't really have a lot of housing supports and you lose your housing, what do? You go into one of the core cities. And so we, as a core city, are like trying to use our little limited city resources to hold up a whole region, us along with Minneapolis, so you represent, trying to hold up a whole region and a whole state of housing needs. And it's just not going to be sustainable. So we'll break all of our piggy banks trying to help families through this moment. And we'll constantly be chasing the eight ball. We'll constantly be trying to play catch up. We need serious federal intervention. We need serious federal resources on a historic scale to be able to just survive and get through this moment.
Yeah, I mean, we have hundreds
Mhm.
in Minneapolis. I mean, it's more than 1,000, and it is tragic to see to know that there are limited resources, to know that just the willpower also in trying to provide resources
That's
to
right.
people to understand that their humanity and their dignity should matter to us as their neighbors is also very, very challenging. And as we think about just eviction and homelessness during this pandemic, I know that the upcoming administration, the president-elect and vice president-elect,
That's right.
Harris, have put out their
You're
plan
saying not
for
you're saying not the outgoing president, but the incoming
the
president.
incoming
Yes.
president,
Yes.
because we can now debate policy and not personalities. It's really exciting in America.
That's right.
So the incoming, they put out, right, like this really amazing plan on what it will take for us to turn things around. And I noticed in their economic recovery, housing and eviction isn't part of it. And so we still have a long way to go before that's even being recognized as being part of the economic crisis that we are currently seeing as part of this pandemic. But going back to your initiative,
Hmm.
what will it take for us to move it from to expand it and beyond a pilot project? And what will it take for us to help on a federal level?
I think that's a really good question. One of the premises of Mayors for Guaranteed Income, and Mayor Tubbs will be, a great spokesman for this when he comes on the call, is to kind of just demonstrate the policies and demonstrate like what actually happens. This space, as you know well, is full of racist tropes about what'll happen if you give those people, right, with the air quotes, if you give those people money, they'll do this and they'll do that, and they'll do the other with it. And that's one of the reasons the research and the evaluation, the independent third party evaluation, is so important. We have all kinds of rhetoric and fear-based rhetoric involved in politics, and our belief, we believe in science, we believe in evaluation, we believe in research, and we want, though, especially when there's something important like public safety or like our economy, we need to make sure that our policies are following research and real data for us. And so that's why that evaluation is so critical for us. Another piece that I think the federal government, because our goal is to advocate for these types of policies on the federal level, but then also at the state levels. And one of the arguments that we have, and we kind of got mired in this conversation with regard to our pilot, is how do you make sure that if we give somebody $500 in a month, they don't just get kicked off of their federal benefits?
Right.
And I turn the question around, like, how do we create federal benefits that don't punish families for accessing more resources, and kind of moving their family upward on the kind of ladder to success? It's insane that we even have to ask that question, but we do, because those federal guidelines, those federal policies, and criteria are so scattershot And in so many ways, they're so just mismatched, and they create kind of the benefits cliffs, which I know that you're aware of, that says,
Mhm.
you know, you have families who can't take a raise or can't take a new job or can't take a promotion at work because they'll lose their benefits. What
Right.
that is that structure.
Child care and
That's
yeah.
right. That's structural racism,
Right.
Congresswoman. That is our federal policies leaving families stuck in a revolving door of poverty and literally shutting the door for them to take those half steps on the escalator to kind of the type of thriving family and meeting their family goals that they want. So that's something that I would hope and love to see somebody really tackle on the federal level as well.
Oh, that's wonderful. So let's invite Mayor Tubbs to join us.
Yes,
Uh,
ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't seen him on his HBO special.
so Mayor Tubbs not only became the first African American mayor to represent Stockton, but he also became the youngest mayor to represent Stockton. And as mayor, Tubbs has secured over $20 million in philanthropic capital to launch the Stockton Scholars, a place-based scholarship that aims to triple the number of Stockholm residents entering and graduating from college. Tubbs also brought Advanced Peace to Stockton, a data-driven program that works to reduce gun violence in his community. And many of us know you as the UBI mayor. Welcome, Mayor. How are you?
I am felt like I was in a master class. I was taking notes, listening to you and one of my favorite mayors and one of my good friends, Mayor Carter. So I'm great, happy to be here. Wish it was in person. Glad that we have the tools to do it virtually. And I thank you for your leadership on this and a variety of issues.
Yeah. So I know Mayor Carter referenced you a few times. You and I met right after I was sworn into Congress in a conversation about guaranteed income and what it looked like for us to have economic packages that really can create wealth for Americans who have lived in generational poverty. And so I want us to start the conversation with you telling me, how did you first hear about and came to be a champion of guaranteed income?
Yeah, well, you mentioned it in the intro you did before Melvin came on. But in college, I took a class on Dr. King. It was about 12 years ago. And we read Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community, his last book. What's fascinating, which makes sense now, is he wrote that book in 1967, which was a time of just intense civil unrest in this country. There were over 200 protests around racial injustice and police brutality at that time. And looking out of that, he said, we tried to solve poverty by solving for healthcare, which is important, and people deserve healthcare as a right. With education, with housing, he said, but the simplest way to approach poverty is the most direct. And he said something more revolutionary than $500 a month or $1,000 a month or $2,000 a month. He said a guaranteed medium income paid at the national median income to every American so that at least everyone has an income floor. And I remember reading that as an 18-year-old and saying, why don't we talk about this now? Like, we talk about his dream. Like, every year I'm called upon to recite passages of a speech of his, but I had never heard about this idea of a guaranteed income. Fast forward 9, 10 years later, my first year as mayor, I just, like most cities in this country, there's a lot of issues in the city, but I would argue the root cause is structural poverty and structural violence. So I had my team research the most radical interventions for poverty. And they came back with the work Give Directly was doing in Kenya and pilots being done in Brazil and Mexico in terms of direct cash transfers. So when they first told me, Congressman, I was a little bit, I said, you know what? Let's save this maybe for term 2. This might be a little bit too much to try with
Right.
all the other things we need to work on. But then literally the next week, I was at a meeting with about the gig economy and the need to provide portable benefits or a living wage to good workers. And I met Natalie Foster, who's a co-chair of the Economic Security Project. Long story short, at the end of the meeting, she approached me and said, Mayor Tubbs, we are looking for a city to test this idea of basic income with. Are you familiar with it? I said, oh my gosh, I have a task force looking at this right now. We should work together. And we decided to pilot in Stockton. But for me, I wanted to pilot it not because I knew I was right, but I was committed to getting it right and figuring out what can we do to get rid of poverty. I just hate poverty. I think it's abhorrent. But over the course of hearing the stories of my constituents, of seeing how the $500 a month has helped them live with dignity, and particularly now during COVID-19, and seeing how $500 has been the difference between people going to work with COVID symptoms or not going to work with COVID symptoms, now I'm adamant, and I'll be pushing and speaking with my friends in the White House and in the Senate and the House about the need to have, at least during COVID-19, whether it's your bill or some of the other bills, just a bill that provides a baseline level of cash. And then I'll argue reflective of the dignity that people have during this pandemic, where we know people can't work, where we know, you mentioned, Congresswoman, how your bills have gone up. When you're like, look at my food bill, and imagine, and you're a Congresswoman.
Right.
And imagine the retail rate.
That's what I was getting at with Mayor Melvin Carter, is that like we can absorb it, right? Like I can absorb the increased cost of food. I can absorb the increased cost of water and electricity and all of that. But I couldn't have absorbed it, right? Like I had the same amount of children before I became a member of Congress, but my income was 1/4 of what I make now, or 1/5 of what I make now. And there was no way, right? I would have been in line for in those pantries. I would have been asking for support. I would have been in that situation where I would have asked the county to help pay for my electricity and my water. And so it is, I think, oftentimes lost on people who are in positions of power, who have the resources, just how challenging, right? The farther you are removed from poverty, the farther you are removed from understanding the challenges that people actually go through and the decisions that they have to make about food, about water, like where to sleep. You know, I mean, I've had times where I didn't eat, right? Like as a mom of young children living in poverty. And I think oftentimes, you know, people don't understand when we are aggressively speaking about these issues, that we speak aggressively about it, not because our constituents are feeling this, but we ourselves remember what it means to be hungry, to need of support, to stand in line for services.
And that's what I think when people were before people were saying this is such a risk, this is such a risk. To your point, I didn't understand it because I would just see images of my mother, right, who had me as a teenager, who was single, who barely graduated high school because I was born when she was in high school, who struggled, and who I never saw made bad financial decisions, who worked herself literally to death. I never saw her take a mental health day. I never heard her say I need a self-care day. I never saw her take a vacation unless it was to help take care of me if I was sick. And that was the image I had. People like you, people like my mother, people like 1 in 2 Americans who can afford the $1 in $500 emergency, and saying, and I think you and some of your colleagues in Congress have made this point so clear when we talked about kind of the initial COVID packages, that we always seem to trust certain people with money, and we don't get the return we're expecting, but we do it time after time after time. And saying, hey, if we can trust Jeff Bezos, and not hating on him, but other people with money and with the agency to make good decisions on behalf of themselves in this country, why can't we trust the people who power our democracy? Why can't we trust the essential workers? Why can't we trust the mothers and the women who are doing caregiving and who are literally raising up the next generation? And for me, that's what this conversation about guaranteed income is about. It's not just about cash. It's about like notions of universal human dignity, that no human being deserves to be hungry or to be outside in the cold without shelter, particularly when we have the resources to not make, like, it's a choice. Like we allow it to happen. And I'm so excited about you. I'm so excited about Mayor Carter. I'm so excited about the 29 other mayors in the Mayors for Guaranteed Income Network who are just going to have to force us to have this conversation. Like, why do we allow poverty? Why do we allow economic insecurity? Like, why is this what we want? Like, who is this helping? And why is this reflective, or how is this reflective of who we want to be as a society?
Yeah. I mean, I remember right when the pandemic hit, I introduced my piece of legislation to give $1,000 to every adult and 500 to every child, right? And I think about just how much resources is being absorbed in providing support for people who are being evicted, how many resources are being absorbed by providing resources to people who need help paying their electricity and all of the other things, right? And there is something to be said about giving support in the front end and being bold, and how much that actually costs less than all of the programs we fund that provide Band-Aid, and cost so much to administer as well. And we often just are in a mental space where we can't fathom the programs that actually help being the real ones, and we are stuck thinking programs who haven't actually been helpful are the ones that we need to continue to fund.
And I think what's also fascinating is this notion of agency, to your point,
Right.
and that when you there's not one program, one intervention, one bailout where every single person made a good decision. So I don't know why we apply that same criterion to people who need money to survive, right? Like it seems so backwards to me. And I think what I've learned from Stockton, because I remember when we were first doing it, I was like, are we going to marry it with financial counsel? Like, what else we're going to do? And then it just challenged all my assumptions, because to your point, I realized that the issue is not, there's not a higher concentration of poor people who are bad at with money than rich people, right? Like the issue is that they don't have money to manage. Like that's literally the issue. Yeah. Or the fact that people are smart enough to make the right decisions for themselves and their families, and that the choices people are making may seem illogical, but they're made in the context of scarcity, where you might have to go to the check cashing place on the 5th because the bill is due the 6th and you don't get paid to the 10th. And yes, it's going to make your money shrink because there's interest rates, but the alternative is to be evicted, or the alternative is to have your lights cut off, or the alternative is not to have gas for your kids to go to school. So again, to your point, I think the guaranteed income is, to what Melvin was saying earlier as well, it's the 21st century New Deal. Like in 1935, we came up with unemployment insurance, and thank God we did. That was almost 100 years ago. We can't face 2020 pandemics with 1935 responses or understandings of what folks need. And that's why I'm so grateful for your leadership and the leadership of Rep. Tlaib. I'm getting in trouble because there's been a bunch of bills in Congress. Even VP-elect Harris and Senator Sanders and Senator Markey came out with something, and understanding that this is our New Deal moment and we have to meet the moment. But to your point, with something new that puts the onus and the trust and the agency on the people, and then not having us create a whole nother bureaucratic system of support.
Yeah, and I think we'll have Melvin join us for this, but I'm curious. I know that your success is talked about quite a lot, not just in the corners where mayors exist, but it's talked a lot about in Washington, right, in the Beltway where policy decisions are being made. We also know that universal basic income, or guaranteed income, has been implemented in many countries, from Finland to Kenya to Canada, and many of them have been successful. And so, what would it take for us here in the United States to say, this isn't something that we should just try as a pilot project, but it's something that we should try to implement, for the whole country, just the way in which we did Social Security and others, because we know those programs have been successful, and this is a program that can be successful. And so that's one question. The question following that is, because you've said, Vice President-elect Harris has talked about or has co-sponsored pieces of legislation in the Senate. Are you optimistic about this becoming part of the national platform and agenda with the administration?
Yeah, well, let me first say, and not to be pessimistic, 'cause I'm very optimistic, but if COVID-19, when you literally have people who can't go to work, who oftentimes, because we don't offer paid time off for all people, who are literally told to stay home for 2 weeks, and it's 2 weeks of income, economy on the verge of recession. If this is not a moment for something like guaranteed income, I'm not sure what can actually make it happen, because this is the most clear example of just the savage nature of our current economy, and that gives me hope. And I think to your point about Social Security, a guaranteed income is really essentially a Social Security for all. It's saying let's provide an income floor for all people, and let's build from there. And I am hopeful, and I think particularly with leaders like Mayor Carter and yourself, that, I mean, power gives nothing without a demand, without being pushed. So it's not going to be a cakewalk, but the willingness is there on bills and papers. The need is there, given where we are as a country, and the opportunity. I mean, I worked hard for President-elect Joe Biden, and part of it was because he said he saw himself as FDR. He saw himself on the verge of a New Deal moment, and I believed him when he said it. And I know Senator VP-elect Harris has this bill with Senator Sanders, but also the LIFT Act has also talked about the need for cash transfers. So it's not just going to happen, but I am completely dedicated to pushing and prodding and being annoying when I have to, because it will help create the outcomes we want to see, particularly during this COVID-19 time.
Mayor Carter?
I'm the same. And, I would echo, one, my notebook is full. I'm going to need more notebook paper, Mayor Tubbs, for the notes that I take as you talk. So I always appreciate hearing you wax eloquent about your considerable studies. I think Mayor Tubbs is right. I think, I'll tell you what keeps me optimistic is the energy. And the great thing about this is Mayor Tubbs and I, we're not by ourselves in calling for policies like this. And it's not just that there are other mayors and a whole bunch of other mayors. How many mayors now in MGI, Mayors for Guaranteed Income? Mayor Tubbs? 30 mayors now. It was 25 last count I had. So it just continues to grow, who are saying we're committed to doing this. We're committed to demonstrating this. But it's not just mayors and it's not just elected officials. The truth is we're in the minority. The majority is the people in our communities, the people across our country who know that people need help, who know that people need cash help, and who know that there's going to be no substitute as we move forward through this crisis and beyond this crisis for significant assistance of a historic level that we're not used to. That's a new kind of phase of our existence and our togetherness in that web of interdependence that Martin Luther King talked about. Tubbs, I read Martin Luther King as well, so I just wanted to get one quote in there as well. But I, the biggest reason for me to be confident is, and to be excited and to be optimistic about the direction we're headed, is the fire that I've seen in American people all across our country, certainly over the course of 2020. And one of the things that we know that is when that fire is channeled correctly, when that fire is channeled constructively and effectively, that's, I believe, the fire that ushered civil rights and eliminated slavery, and that has ushered America through every crisis, every turning point, and every pivot point towards being a real democracy and really making true, redeeming the power of those words, we the people.
And Congressman, can I say one thing real quick on that point? Because I think, particularly given this moment we're in, when we were out protesting for Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and Sandra Bland and others, it wasn't just about, and I think people missed it, it wasn't just about police brutality. It was about police brutality, but it was also about just structural violence. It was about the avoidable impairment of basic human needs. It was about lack of opportunity. It's about lack of hope. It's about lack of investment. And that's also why I'm so optimistic in this moment, because I think, as Dr. King saw in 1967, that a response to a lot of these things is actually economic in nature. And economic justice is racial justice. That Black Lives Matter isn't just about the common sense, and it should be pretty basic at this point, that unarmed innocent people should not be murdered. by the law enforcement their taxes pay for. But more importantly, it's about ensuring that folks, black lives, and therefore all lives can matter and live with dignity in our economy. And that's just not the case. We see it with wealth disparities, we see it with income disparities, and we see it even now when you have Black people, particularly Black women and other people of color who are essential workers during this time, don't make a living wage, still can't pay rent, that are really out exposing themselves to a deadly virus that would disproportionately kill them or their family members. And again, I just think it's just a terrible storm, but the perfect storm to make some good trouble and to do some work and to make our descendants proud of what we were able to do with this mess we were handed in the year 2020.
Yeah, and it's also about liberation. And since we're quoting Martin Luther King, let me get my quote in. He did say, right, like what is it to have a right to sit at the counter if you can buy a hamburger? And so we are fighting for economic liberation, and that has been part of the civil rights movement that still continues. So we have a question that came in from the folks who have joined us tonight, and it's this. It says, how do people keep the drive to thrive if they are given an income separate from work? And can the federal government afford basic income?
Yeah, and feel free to jump in, Mayor Carter. But first, absolutely, I think we forget that in the current economy, there's all type of work that's happening, particularly work done by women, particularly domestic work and caregiving that's not compensated. And I don't know about Minnesota, but I'm pretty sure it's similar to California, where you're not going to be able to live off $500 or $1,000 a month. But it is enough to create a floor for you. But you're not going to be able to live off that. And also, I think when we talk about work, we're really talking about people want to feel purposeful. People want to feel like they have value. People want to feel like they're contributing. And that doesn't oftentimes come from work that doesn't treat people with dignity, frankly. So there's no, in all the studies done, there's no evidence that people stop working. In fact, in Stockton, what we found was $500 was enough, to your point, Congressmember, to provide economic liberation. So people had choices as to what type of work they would take, that they were able to be more selective about the jobs they took, that they were able to take time off and interview for other jobs that are more aligned with that they're able to bet on themselves and start a small business. And then number two, we already pay for a basic income. We pay for it, as the Congressmember mentioned, with all the ills of society that are caused by poverty, where poverty is the root cause. We pay for it in our law enforcement costs. We pay for it in the cost of homelessness. We pay for it in our emergency rooms. We pay for it throughout. And I think for smart people watching, if one of you consultant people would sit down and just really give me a cost for how much all this stuff costs, we would really see that we're throwing money away with no returns and no outcomes.
Can I just turn off my camera and just listen to Mayor Tubbs talk? Because he's dropping the mic on. I mean, but that's exactly it. Right. And that's one of the things that I always say to folks is, who say, can we afford this? Well, when we do our budgeting, I mentioned that we always do our budgeting here in St. Paul through like this kind of community-based kind of engagement process. And I quote my mother in our budget process. And I always tell folks that my mother told me that whatever book you read or wherever you go on Sundays, that the way to know what you have faith in, to know what you believe in and what you value is to check your checkbook. Right. And the phrase that we rehearse in our budgeting process is, if your budget doesn't reflect your values, then they're not really your values, right? Because your budget does reflect your values. And so, we may have to reprioritize some things. But if we really believe what we say, that every child born in our country could grow up to develop a cure for cancer or be an astronaut or the next president of the United States, then it would be ridiculous for us not to bet on those children. It would be ridiculous for us not to bet on those families. If I was going to tell you right now that company XYZ, whatever stock ticker is going to, make $1 million, is going to make $1 billion over the course of the next 40 years, we'd all figure out how to invest in that company. We'd all figure out how to divert as much resources as we can to put it right there. To Mayor Tubbs' point, this, as we talk about the state of families in our country, we're talking about for the next 40, 60, 80 years, who's going to become, who's going to be able to have the barriers moved out of their way so that they can become contributing teachers and taxpayers and community members and lawyers and mayors and those types of things, versus who is going to get stuck at those kind of revolving doors that, like we were talking about earlier, that we create too often through policy. And so it's very expensive not to support families. And we understate that cost because sometimes it's hidden and sometimes it takes place over a course of a generation. That's far more expensive than it would be to really invest in our young people, like we're advocating for now.
And a quick number. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say a quick number because I already know how my folks are online. So a number for $2 trillion, the cost of the 2017 Trump tax cuts, you could give every American family today who makes $125,000 or less $500 a month. So we can start there. Let's start with $2 trillion. We've shown that we can spend that. I know Rep. Omar has already made this point several times on the floors of Congress. We could start there and build our way. But if we start with every family under 100K, that would make a huge difference for the lives of children and families and communities.
Yeah, but I think also to the mayor's to Mayor Carter's point, like we can see, right, and we hear policymakers talk to the economic survival that is in bailing out Wall Street for our country, but we never hear or are allowed to make the case for economic survival when we bail out our families. Because both of those are necessary for us to have a healthy, thriving communities. And one is prioritized, even though there isn't really a direct benefit, then the one that will actually have a direct benefit to all of us, because it limits, as you said, right, the number of societal ills that we continue to address every single day. And I just think that the more cases we have in what's happening in both of your cities, the more we are able to make the case, and the more conversations like this that we get to engage in, the easier it becomes for people to kind of see how this can be a tangible thing and where the benefits are. And the second, a question that we have come in is—
Hey, Congressman, before you move on, can I just tag one thing on to what you just said? Is we do need a healthy economy. We do need healthy businesses and healthy employers, and also healthy families and workers and community members. But and this, I think, evokes kind of Citizens United and corporate personhood, because the reason we need businesses to be healthy is so that people can thrive, right? Like, we don't need businesses for business's sake, right? We need business and industry in our country so that workers can thrive, so that people who invest in a great idea can create wealth for their families, can create transferable wealth for their families. And so I think what we're talking about is a rethinking of just sort of the short-sighted, we want to get money into businesses, and the economy means businesses thriving, to kind of thinking beyond that to say, no, the economy means people in our communities thriving. The economy means that in a country that often loves to say we're the richest country on the planet or the greatest country in history, that for children to go to sleep hungry is just not acceptable. And that's, I think, what Mayor Tubbs is saying when he says for $500 a month, we can establish a floor of a standard of living in our country that is far overdue.
Yeah, because I think in a way, when we provide support to businesses, whether it's small or big, we are providing that floor. And we don't say by giving them money, they're going to become lazy and they're not going to work and they're not going to produce, right? And so we do now just need to stretch the way in which we think about what that floor means, and how that is actually going to create more productivity when we don't have people living with the anxiety about worrying, where they're gonna make their ends meet. And to this question, I think goes nicely into the conversation we just had, and it talks about the effectiveness of UBI. How do you measure? And Mayor Tubbs, maybe since you've already had it, there have been measures within your own city. Is there a way to measure the effectiveness of programs like this so far?
Yeah, so, and for those of you that want to nerd out, if you go to stocktondemonstration.org, you can download a 18-page research discussion paper that was written by researchers who are smarter than me. And we also just created, in partnership with mayors like Carter and others, the Center for Guaranteed Income Research at the University of Pennsylvania, which is going to centralize all the research from all the studies. Our good friend Asia Brown in Compton just announced she's doing a big pilot as well. We expect more to be. My good friend LeVar Stoney in Richmond, Virginia, just announced he's going to do a pilot as well. So all that research will be centralized there. In terms of Stockton, we were really measuring three things. The first one was the question, how is the money spent? And spoiler alert, people are people. So the money was spent like how you spent money, right? So the money was spent majority on food, particularly during COVID-19. We saw food expenditures, to your point, Congressmember, go up from like 35% of all expenditures of the $500 to like 45% as people were sheltering in place. Then we know that money was spent on utilities and bills and appliances. And then about 5 to 10% miscellaneous items, and less than 2%. I hate to have to say this every time, but just so it's out there, less than 2% was spent on drugs and alcohol, including glasses of wine, which a lot of people buy. So that's the first measure. The second measure was around health and well-being, to your point, in terms of how does a guaranteed income or income floor help you with feelings of stress and anxiety. So I haven't seen and the report will be out in February, so I haven't got the measures on that yet. And the third was really about about strengthening our democracy. And I think this one was a really interesting point because I never really considered that for many people, the interactions with government are always extractive or negative. It's always, I'm going to pay this, whether it's a tax or a bill or a ticket or a fine, etc. But it's never, hey, I see you, and let me help you out a little bit. So also feelings of efficacy, self-efficacy, but also warm feelings towards government. Like, do you feel more connected to your community? Do you feel more part of community? So those are the three measures we're looking at in Stockton. And I know Mayor Carter is doing similar, but also has some different things that he's going to be looking at.
Yep, and I think that's important. And one of the things I want to just tag on to what you just said, Mayor Tubbs, is we know what they spent the money on because if I'm correct, you're putting the deposit into a debit card, right, that can actually track it. So it's not self-reporting, it's actual real data. And that's one thing I think that's really important as we talk about like the science of climate and the science of all these other types of things. We ought to be talking about the science and data around our economy and around public safety and some of those other things that we're talking about as well, because I believe in that information. I believe in that science as well. So yes, I think so. We're using the same national research team that Stockton did, that you guys used, Mayor Tubbs, and I think the add-on that we're excited to explore is the connection between our college savings accounts program and guaranteed income, and how and if those two things taken in combination can create a synergistic effect that's greater than the sum of its parts.
And in that, I think in an effort to help get some of this information, I know some of you know this, but we introduced an amendment to get a federal grant going to help collect and get data, and so that there will be a national commission to help study and put this information together so that we can see how to collectively move as a country to implement income guarantee. So with that, I don't know if you all have parting words or things that you want to leave with our audience. I know that you all look more hopeful, more optimistic, lighter than I've seen you the last time I saw you. Because we are living in a different day than the last time I saw you, and so I don't know if there's any hopeful words you want to leave with people who really deeply care about the issues of guaranteed income.
I'll leave Mayor Tubbs with the final word, but I'll say this briefly: is that we have a political system in which people stand up and shout no, right? And when the president, the outgoing president, not the incoming president, when he says something crazy or tweets something crazy, or when some senator from somewhere, says something ridiculous or floats a ridiculous idea, we're used to standing up and saying we think that's crazy, and we're going to protest the White House. We have a much less developed muscle on standing up to support and get behind leaders like Mayor Tubbs, and like leaders across the country, like you, Congress member, who are leading in ways that actually do reflect our values and do reflect our community needs. I can tell you the first controversial vote I ever took when I was on the city council was about tasers for every police officer. And I didn't like the concept. I ended up voting no, but I sort of stonewalled this public hearing for an hour and a half, asking questions and, kind of digging into the topic. And I was starting to feel by myself. And I looked behind me, and there were literally 4 people in a room of 200 people. There were 4 people at this hearing from the neighborhood that I represented, people of color sitting in this room. And I turned around and they looked at me and they smiled and nodded and went, right. And it like inflated me and gave me strength to kind of step back up to the table and do the work that they had sent me to do. And so, as we go into a new era in the White House, as we go into a new era, as we fight to get beyond COVID and say, what are the next strategies? My treaty to folks is, don't just stand up to oppose the people who float ridiculous, insane ideas, right? But the folks who are on our side, the folks who are speaking truth to power and all these things, make sure you stand up and stand behind them to make sure that all of us, as we kind of walk into the different spaces that we have to walk and make these arguments, we know that there's somebody who has our back.
Yeah, and I'll say first, Minnesota, what's in the water or in the snow, but to have 2 folks like you all leading in that state, national leaders, your state's so lucky. If no one else gives you your flowers, here are your flowers. And I say that because leadership is hard, particularly when you lead in a way that's equity minded, that's justice for all focus, and it's truly about all people. And I know it's hard. So thank you, thank you, thank you. If no one else told you that today. And to folks watching, I would say the most important thing to remember in this moment is that change doesn't just happen, that we have to force it and push it to happen. And the new terrain that we operate in now almost didn't happen if it wasn't for the record turnout and the organizing and contributions, particularly of Black women. We would be having a vastly different conversation today. And that gives me a lot of hope, because it's through our actions, the choices we make, the decisions we make, the things we amplify, that we create the world that we deserve. And again, for me, it's really about not universal basic income, but universal human dignity, and having a society that reflects what we value, which is really kind of what we already, the thing is, we already wrote it down on paper, so we don't have to write the values. We know the values, but I think in this administration and under the leadership of folks like Rep. Ilhan and Mayor Carter, we just have to push to make sure that we have true liberty and true justice for all people. When we say all people, we literally mean every single person.
Well, thank you both for taking the time for talking with me. I am just honored to not know you both as friends, but to also know you as my co-conspirators in this space of trying to create a better tomorrow for all of us. Your last words, Mayor Carter, hit home, because I think oftentimes we are comfortable, right, in holding people accountable. We're ready to rally and show up in pushing people, but we are not as ready and as engaged when people are pushing for the things that we care about. And this is going to be a space, as we push in the next 4 years, where we're gonna need people to be there as we push for these big ideas. And so that invitation was great. I really do appreciate you for that. And so I'm gonna say to everyone who's watching us, in the next new Congress, the 117th Congress, I will be introducing guaranteed income nationwide, and it will be tailored it will be tailoring a plan to the new economic realities we're currently facing because of this pandemic. And it will hopefully allow us to engage this upcoming administration, and as we push them to leap forward into a future that could be brighter for all of us.